Hello, welcome to this video I'm doing, which is a little bit different to my usual ones. It's basically a bit of a challenge that I'm setting myself to try to explain music theory, something about music theory, to someone who uh, doesn't know much or anything. We'll find out about music theory. It might turn into a series if this goes well. If not, then I'll pretend it didn't happen. We shall see. Um, but yeah, so let's start by saying hello, Emma. You've been on this before. You've been on my
Hi.
podcast before. We've talked about music, but we've not really
Yeah.
talked about music theory. So, do you know anything about music theory? I'm not sure what you do or do not.
Um, Really very, very little. So I stopped music in school as soon as it became possible to do so.
Yeah.
Um, in my comp, we were put into sets for like how good you were at like a bunch of subjects together. And it was like all my good ones, like art and also music. So I ended up in like the best class at music, but I was total dog shit. Like I was one of the kids that wrote the letters on the keyboard keys because I couldn't remember them without them. Um,
That's fine. That's fine. So you don't really know much. Let's just throw like if you some terms at you, and it's not a test, obviously, but let's just see if you've at least heard of them or if you have any idea. So if someone said like a musical scale, would you know what that is?
is a scale the one like where you go like up and down the keyboard sort of.
Yes. Yeah. That basically is it. So if someone said like a chord, would you have any idea what a chord is?
A chord is like a bunch of notes together, but I could not be more specific than that.
Well, I mean, technically that's it really. That's it really. But there's a way like chords are put together, but we won't necessarily get onto that. But then if someone said like a what if someone said, "Oh, what key is this song in?" Would you have any idea what that meant?
Are there more keys than major and minor? Because I
Um,
those two,
yeah. So essentially, yeah. So I guess
lesser
we call
and also major or minor.
yeah. So we'd call those like tonalities, I guess. So they're the two types. They're the two flavors. They're the two flavors of key. So you get like major, or you get minor. But like yeah, so key might be like A major, or it might be A minor, or it might be C major,
Yes. Yes.
whatever, etc. Cool. So there's like a vague understanding, but we'll try to get into it in a bit more detail and see if you can understand some of it to some degree as it applies to the song we're going to talk about.
Cool.
Um, cool. So yeah, the song we're going to talk about is Aldous Harding's "The Barrel," which was a song you introduced to me. And for anyone watching, here's a little sample.
I feel time is up. Look at all the peaches. It's already dead. I know you have the dough.
So you kind of suggested it because you said like, oh well, the lyrics don't mean anything, so I'm probably not enjoying it from lyrical reasons.
Yeah, like there must be there must be something about like the music. I don't know. I think the lyrics, even though they don't make any sense, they are kind of cool. But yeah, I wondered if there was something like musically about it that appealed to me in some way that I couldn't articulate.
Yeah. Okay, good. So, I mean, I really like the song, and I do think the lyrics are good, but they're also just like, wait, what are you
Yeah,
saying about?
yeah.
And
Like it
musically,
makes me feel like I can't speak English.
yes, it has that vibe, doesn't it? It's like, have I had
Yeah,
a
it's kind of like
stroke?
that song where like they just made up some. There's an Italian band that just made up some gibberish that sounded kind of like English. Like that's what it feels like to listen to it. You're like, wait, is that what?
All the difference is stand, light the shoes go, my man. You've been cast to the match called the Radio Girls.
And I do like the fact that certain bits of it just sound like they're kind of like folk aphorisms or something. Like it says it's like, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You're like, no, what? What are you talking about? Cool. So we'll go into it bit by bit. We'll start like general, like it's still like music theory, but like the first few ideas we'll talk about are kind of like really accessible. I think anybody would understand them, and they're kind of applicable to like narrative structures in a way. I'd say. So firstly, I'd say like listening to the song. Have you? I'm not asking you to do it, but and if you've not done it, it's fine. But if you've not done it, it would be quite telling because it's the kind of song where I would imagine someone wouldn't necessarily pick up on it. What do you think about like the song structure? So do you know what song structure is generally? I mean,
Um, I've never really thought about it before. Do you mean like? I guess I've only really thought about the structure of the lyrics, but is that not the same thing?
well, it broadly is likely going to be for like most songs. It's basically, you know, verse, chorus,
Right, right.
bridge, outro, intro, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's not too dissimilar to like poetic form where, you know, a
Right.
lot of times it'll be labeled A, B and stuff like that. So in, you know, popular music, verse, chorus, maybe with a pre-chorus or, you know, intros and outros, that's like the default thing. And
Yeah.
then you get a lot of like you do get different forms in popular music. So the most famous example, which is a good kind of counterexample to this, would be like Bohemian Rhapsody, where the form is very much not, you know, verse chorus verse chorus. It's just kind of different sections that are all put together. Um, it's a very different form. But yeah, have you listened to this song? Like, what would you kind of intuitively say is the structure there, or have you identified where, or maybe this is a verse or anything like that?
Um, Trying to think. I did listen to it just before, but I just like my brain just doesn't, because I don't know. My brain doesn't like impose the structure over it, so I
Mhm.
didn't remember. Like obviously, like if I tried really hard, I can. I I don't have to try really hard. I could tell like, oh yeah, that's a verse. Oh yeah, that repeated bit is the chorus.
Yeah.
But I can't pull it back out of my memory without hearing the song right now.
No, that's perfectly fine. That is what I would have been like before I kind of just consciously sat down and I was like, wait, what is actual structure? Because I feel like for I don't know, I'm just trying to think of like any pop song, whatever it could be. Like I don't know, like you know, "Take on Me" by Aha, or just something really famous that everyone knows. Like the chorus is kind of easily identifiable, isn't it? It's like, well, we know what the chorus bit is because it makes it really obvious to you. Um, and if it, you know, it's the same for most pop tunes. And this, I mean, it's kind of a folky, kind of folk rock or popular. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's kind of not obvious at all because it's all at the same level, and it's not as if the chorus is
Right,
like
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
it's not like
I was just thinking about my other candidate song, which is the theme tune from Star Trek Enterprise, because that's like it's so like patronizingly manufactured that
right. Yes,
even though
yeah,
I can't hear it, I'm like, yeah, yeah, that's the chorus. But when I think about the barrel, it's just so weird. It's hard
yeah.
to remember.
It is, and because it is all kind of a level. There are like, but so what we'll do is we're going to like distinguishing factors that kind of take us from a chorus or a verse or whatever from bit to bit. So the broad structure is verse, pre-chorus, chorus. Those are the three kind of main sections that repeat throughout it. And there's an outro which is kind of just the chorus. Um, and then there's one other bit which is the instrumental interlude where there's like a little bit of electric guitar just playing. It's maybe like 20 seconds long. How long is it? I wrote it down. I think it looks like it's about 12, 13 seconds long. So it's like super short. It's just like a little guitar bit towards the end. But we can play it in a second whilst we go through it. Um, but yeah, so the song is, I think, and it's less obvious what the kind of the structure is, just because it is all of like this kind of like relatively flat level. But there are those still as distinguishing elements. So we'll go through them a bit. Um, and yeah, so as I said, verse, pre-chorus, chorus. So as we go through it, we'll touch upon keys and what like key centers are a little bit, and I've got like nice little diagrams that I've drawn in an image editor, which might help you a little bit understand them. So, firstly, um, yeah, so let's listen to the song a bit because I think it'll be useful to hear like where the verses start and where the pre-chorus starts. So it's kind of an instrumental introduction first, but then we have a verse. So the verse lasts pretty much for the first minute or so. So if I just play it and then you'll hear a bit of the verse.
Feel time is up.
So like that's the verse bit, and then we get this until, and this is when you hear it, it's a lot more obvious where the pre-chorus is. So I'll start it just before the pre-chorus and see if you can just hear it and identify like I don't know what like dynamically, which is like volume, or instrumentally if there's anything that happens here which is different to the verse. So this is just sorry, this is the end of the verse that'll go into the pre-chorus. So just listen for something.
Look at all the peaches.
So what is it? What could you hear? What happened there? Do you think that kind of
Cool.
distinguished?
Was it a different instrument that came in?
Yeah, yeah. Do you think you could guess what it is?
Can you play it again?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, cool.
Look at all the peaches.
So there's a guitar and maybe a drum, but then what that thing is, what comes in, I do not know.
Well, hopefully I don't look like an idiot here, but I'm pretty sure it's a cello. I mean, it's going to be a cello or a double bass. I don't think it's deep enough to be a bass, but
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, it's like it's a big, tall string instrument. But yeah, so that's like to anyone, like you can hear there's something happening there. There's like an
Something is
introduction of an
happening.
instrument there.
Even
We'll
I,
get to what was that? Sorry.
yeah, even I agree. Something is happening there.
Yes, excellent, cool. So that's like the most obvious, and that's the pre-chorus. So it's not really a chorus that bit, but you can kind of hear it. It kind of builds up to something. So if I take you to the chorus bit.
It's already dead. I know you have the dove.
So what did you hear there? Well, could you hear the transition at least?
Yeah, I think so. There was another instrument that came in, maybe like a piano or something.
Yeah, it's a piano. It's a piano. Yeah. And did you notice anything else? If I put it back, just this might be a little bit more subtle, but I think you will if you.
I know you have the dove. I'm not getting wet.
I mean, there's another voice. I don't know. That's probably not a subtle thing. Okay.
No, that's what I would say. Yeah. And I think it is relatively subtle, but yeah, so it's like a male voice on like the low harmony. Yeah, maybe it's not actually very subtle, but it's kind of I don't think it's like obvious. And again, like nothing about this song like hits you over the head with like what's the chorus.
If you hadn't played it again for me and you were like, Emma, how many voices are in the song? I'd probably be like, one.
Right. Yeah. And it's all part of this like nothing like it's like it's the chorus now. It doesn't do that whatsoever. It's just like this kind of like low key folksy chorus. And there are other parts throughout the song where like I assume it's her like overdubs herself and she does like a high harmony. But again, it's like relatively subtle. It's not like again like to kind of show it in contrast to Queen. It's not like Queen harmonies where it's like whoa.
Right.
It's very like low key. It's just this kind of like little subtle thing that doesn't really massively draw attention to itself. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, that is the song on repeat, right? With these lyrics that just kind of don't make sense. But we'll just briefly look at the instrumental section later on. And that's it, right? It's like super short. It's almost just like, what is that bit doing? It's just like this little bit electric guitar that comes in and then quickly just moves on. Again, super subtle. Doesn't really, again to contrast it with Queen, because it's just a convenient contrast. But a Queen guitar solo is like, hey, look at me, listen to me, listen to how many layers there are, listen to this tone, listen to this melody, and it's just not like that at all. It's just like a little kind of thing going on. But yes, so I think actually before we go into like the deep music theory stuff, this is a concept I heard. I don't know where I read it. Someone talked about it once, but I kind of thought it was an interesting kind of dichotomy. And again, you don't need to know music theory to know this one. It just kind of makes sense. They were like, the difference between like episodic and hypnotic music. They talk about in the context of the music. So episodic would be if you listen to like again Bohemian Rhapsody. It feels like there are distinct episodes in that song. It does this and then it does this. Whereas maybe like a disco song would be hypnotic because it's designed for something very different, right? It's like a dance tune. So hypnotic maybe isn't the perfect word, but do you see what I mean? It's just this constant or consistent like beat or something that is kind of more meant to be consistent over a long period of time because you're dancing to it or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. Hypnotic is quite confusing.
Yeah. But
I get what you mean.
It's a useful distinction, and I don't know what other word would be better, and I'm just going to steal theirs. But I do think because this song is technically like episodic, but the experience of actually listening to the song is whatever we want to call it, hypnotic. It's the opposite. It really kind of feels not completely the opposite because there are distinguishing bits, but it does have that relatively level kind of like, it's all a bit confusing. It's all a bit strange. That kind of vibe to it. Do you know what I mean? Which I think is a big...
I'd say it has like I was going to say tonal consistency, but that might mean a different thing in music. Like if it was like a piece of writing, I would say it had tonal consistency. I don't know if that has like a different meaning in terms of music, but like it feels of a
Yeah.
piece.
Yes, yeah. No, I agree. I mean, most people would probably express it a similar way in music. So a lot of time when it comes to music, tone might be used to mean timbre, which is like how an individual instrument sounds.
Right.
But like people would also say tonal to mean a few other things. And I think if you said what you said, I mean, I know what you mean. Most people know what you mean. But let's get into the kind of like the meaty music theory bit, which hopefully I think I will help you understand. Because there are, although it does have that kind of like level tonal consistency, there are points in the song where we do actually get a key change. So you've probably heard the term key change before. And like, what would you mostly associate it with? Like, or can you name a song where you
Eurovision.
Eurovision? Okay,
Yeah.
Eurovision. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
That
like pop
kind of vibe,
music of decades gone by.
I guess. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like cheesy, maybe would you say it's fair to say?
Yeah, cheesy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So usually when people do that kind of talk about that kind of cheesy pop key change where you can really hear it, it's a very specific kind of key change. So what we're going to do is understand a little bit of what a key is in the first place, and therefore what a key change is, and the kind of the difference between a cheesy key change like that and the key changes we have in this song. Because listening to it, there is no moment where it goes, "Whoa!" It
Yeah,
doesn't do.
if you ask me, does it have one? I would probably say no. But I'm very bad at listening for that sort of stuff. So for the first dance at my wedding, we picked Love on Top by Beyonce. And
Right.
I told everybody, come in at the first key change. That's when I'll have had enough of everybody looking at me trying not to trip on my dress. But the first key change is so early, it's like 30 fucking seconds in. So everyone was like, no, it's too early. We can't go onto the dance floor. So I was just twirling around like an absolute tit, trying not to step on my wedding dress and rip it off me.
Right, right.
So that's how key changes have affected my life. I
Yeah,
hope
yeah.
to learn and better protect myself against them in the future.
Great, I love it. That's great. That is great. Yeah, yeah. So most people when they are talking about key changes, even like musicians, are probably talking exclusively about that really obvious type of key change. Even though technically, like there are a lot of songs that have key changes that you're not going to immediately spot. Like even like people who know a lot about music aren't going to go, "Oh, that was definitely a key change." And like listen to this, I didn't necessarily on first listen. I was just like, "Oh yeah, it isn't. It's not an obvious one." And there are and the whole point is there are obvious and less obvious key changes, and we'll look a little bit at like why and how certain key changes are more obvious. So hopefully this is the hard bit. Hopefully I'll be able to communicate properly what I'm trying to say. So I will need to share my screen for this. So hopefully you now see like an image editor thing. Can you see that?
Yes, I see.
Cool, good. So people watching should also see the same. If not, I'll have to edit it in, but I think it should be working. So what you see here is just like a white page with a bunch of letters on it, right? So these are all the notes, the musical notes available to us on like a standard Western instrument, like a piano or a guitar. Um, and we name them. Ultimately, the names are arbitrary, right? It doesn't really matter if it's an A or a B flat. This little b means a flat, right? So it doesn't matter if it's A, B flat, B, and C. It is ultimately kind of arbitrary. So in a way, and I think this will help you understand it. In a way, what we could really do is just say that it's like a numbering system, but like it's base 12 rather than base 10. Because once we've gone through A, B flat, B, etc., and we go to A flat again, it just starts again. So in the way, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then starting again, we're essentially got a base 12 numbering system that starts again. So you can have A on a guitar, for example, or a piano. You can play A at one point, and you can play A somewhere else, and it's fundamentally it sounds the same to us. Obviously, they're different pitches because one's high pitched, but they end up sounding the same. So this is kind of how it works. And um, yeah, if I just put these lines in, this line just shows the concept there. So it repeats here. So that those red lines are where they repeat. And again, so that A here, obviously not the same pitch as this A here, but when you hear them played together, we recognize them as the same note. Again, it's arbitrary. We could number them 1 through 12.
Right.
Um,
So each sequence of 1 to 12 is a key.
Not quite, not quite. That we call that an octave, right? And why do we call it an octave when there are 12 and we call it octave? We'll get to that in a second. But that's not what a key is. That's just like a that's just like 1 to 10
Wow.
or 0 to 10, right? And
Wait,
then
what's 0 to 10?
it's similar to the analogy I'm trying to draw, maybe
Okay.
tortuous one. But in the way that numbers go 1 to 10, and then essentially 11 is 1 but 10 higher, and 21 is 1 but 20
Okay.
higher,
Okay.
right? That's kind of what an octave is. So an
Right.
octave is just where the notes start repeating themselves,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
a key is basically a pattern within that, if that makes sense, which hopefully it will once I draw it in.
Okay.
So if I put these lines on, this is just within one octave, right?
Okay.
And this is, can you see those yellow like little circles
Yes.
over the letters? So this is basically what a key is. So what I have highlighted here, these notes are the notes of A minor or C major. It's the same thing fundamentally. You don't need to worry about that what that means precisely beyond the fact that this pattern is one key.
Okay.
And the reason this comes back to why do we call it an octave? Because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it repeats. So it's 8 ultimately. It's like, well, there's 7, but it repeats at 8. That's why we call it an octave. It's a bit strange. There are tons of things in music where you're like, well, what?
Okay. I will try and move past that.
Don't worry, don't worry. Yeah, it's just the way it is. But that pattern is a key, right? That is what makes a key. So, in the key of C major, let's just because C major is kind of the default. C major is the white keys on a piano. It's just like they're all just lined out in front of us, and we know the pattern. It's just really straightforward, right? So this key is C major, and it's this specific pattern. But what we could do is, see this these purple circles. These this is the exact same pattern, right? This is the exact same pattern. So when you hear a cheesy key change, what they've done is they've essentially just moved the pattern along one like that.
Oh, okay.
That's all they do. So they could be, let's say they start in a key of C major. By moving it along one, they've just gone to C sharp or they've gone to C sharp major basically. So they've just moved that pattern up one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sort of.
Cool. So just think of it like again, if the analogy is easiest, I think, with numbers. So imagine like the 2 times table, and then you move it along one. So you've moved it from 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc., and you've moved it from the same pattern holds, but now it's 3, 5, 7, 9. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
That's basically what we've done. But the important thing here is that depending on what kind of key change we've done, the new key will share a certain amount of notes with the old key. So you'll see here how it lines up. So if I draw it in briefly, oh, that's a bit too big maybe. So this it's moved along. So this note is no longer shared. In fact, I'll draw on the ones that are shared. This note is still shared. This note is still shared, but everything else has moved, and they don't share those notes anymore. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So when you do this kind of key change, actually, although you've only moved it up one, it's actually like very different because it doesn't share very many notes at all anymore.
I see.
And that is kind of part of why it sounds so different, why it's really obvious to our ears, because what they've done is, oh, they've just moved it up, like if they're playing guitar, they've just moved it up a fret. But really, the notes are almost completely different. So you get this really like, oh, that's my impression of a key change. So what this song does is when it does a key change, in common, as I said before, in like common language, when people talk about key change, they're talking about this type of one, where they've gone from this and they just shift it along one. Sometimes they shift it along two, that happens as well. But most of the time, they've just shifted it along one. But the key change this song does, it doesn't shift it along one, it shifts it along from, let's see, from here to here, basically. It shifts it along quite a lot. Let me just get rid of the bit rubbish. This color. There we go, that's better. So it shifted it along a lot. So by shifting it along further, actually, this shares a lot more notes than the previous one did. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
you'll see here, shifting the key along one, we only share two notes. We've lost all the others, but this shares this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one.
Yeah.
It's actually they share a lot of notes. So in a way, although you've shifted it further in like absolute terms, you've not shifted it very far because the patterns line up in a way that makes sense a little bit more. Now, does that make a little bit of sense?
I
Hopefully,
think so.
good. So
Like I
all
understand
really
the specifics of what you told me. Like the wider context is very
yes,
mysterious and confusing to me. But I
yes,
understand the idea that you've tried to convey just now.
good. But yeah, the wider context is like vague and mysterious. Because it is just genuinely quite difficult because it's like learning a new language, right? And I can teach you like a few, you can learn like a few languages, a few words of a new language like German or whatever. But fitting that into a sentence suddenly is just nowhere near as easy. And it's really much the same with music, right? You can get like a few little insights into it, but to really get it, you need to kind of listen actively and like learn and play or sing or whatever and really consciously do it. So it is tricky. Um, but yeah, it's also difficult and confusing and mysterious because it's potentially like a few hundred, depending on what you're learning exactly. It could be like a few hundred, like 500-600 years worth of like tradition, essentially, that goes back all the way to these like
Mm.
silly people way back when. Do you know what I mean? And it's all kind of part of that tradition, and so much of it, for people who learn like classical theory and then there's like blues, and so much of it is like contradictory, and then so many different schools also have words to apply to all these things that they don't all use the same words or they don't use them in the exact same way. So you get all this it is confusing. So when I teach people, like when like I don't know, like a banjo student or whatever, and I'm introducing them to like ideas of keys and scales, they're just like, well, why is it called that? And I'm like, well, because it is. I don't know. Like there's no other real reason. Don't try not to think too much about the name sometimes and just what it is. But it is genuinely just difficult. But the point is, music fundamentally is really just like a series of patterns. And those patterns aren't necessarily super logical. There's like a logic to them without them being like intuitively logical. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But the point is, yeah, so this song changes keys, and we'll just listen to where they change keys, because again, it's not obvious, it's not immediately obvious, without like knowing a bit about music and having those kind of ear like oral skills in place. So let me just find where I've written the timestamps again. So the first one, the verse all in one key. So where the key change happens is into the pre-chorus, and because it is that key change where there's so many notes shared, it's not super obvious. It really is kind of, and because it's happening at the same time as that dynamic change with the cello coming in, it's like, well, if you don't know much about music, you feel like, well, what am I actually hearing? Am I hearing just like an extra cello, or is it also a key change? So I do think it is tricky, but let's just listen to it.
Look at all the
I can hear it.
Yeah, and that's where it happens. So interestingly, what it does is it changes key from the verse into the pre-chorus, and then going back into the chorus, it just changes back into the original key. So again, a lot of songs do change key into the chorus because maybe you want your chorus to have like a certain lift to it. But again, it's kind of an interesting approach. It's probably not super rare. It probably happens a bit, but I don't think it's as common. It's probably more common to change key into the chorus, but to change key into the pre-chorus and then just change back to the original key in the chorus, it's almost interesting by virtue of not trying to be too interesting as an experiential thing. Do you know what I mean? It's not trying to draw attention to
Right.
chorus. It's just like, oh, we just go back into the verse, the normal verse chords again, and the chords throughout this entire song are pretty much even just the same thing over and over again. Although we have that key change, the verse chords are just the same chords as the chorus chords. Again, not very common in music, maybe in some music, but a lot of the time it would be a slightly different chord progression. Yeah, so it just repeats that around and around a bit. Obviously, the song is quite repetitive. But another point where it does change key is from when it goes into that electric guitar instrumental bit, and it is kind of a similar chord change again, where it's not super where the pattern lines up again. So it's not
Right.
a key thing to remember here is what we call it is like related keys. So if the key thing here. So um, all keys are to some degree related because no matter how you do that pattern, some of those notes are going to be shared. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But some keys are more or less related, and that just means it's like humans or whatever being related, sharing genetic material. Keys that are related share pitches. That's all it means. So the key thing to remember here in this song, when it does change key, it always changes to a closely related key rather than the cliched chord progression that the cliched key change that most people are aware of and can identify more easily. The reason it is more identifiable because they're moving to a key which is not closely related, and it's just like, whoa. So I'm trying to think of like a really famous example. Well, one of my favorite ones is what's it? "Man in the Mirror" by Michael Jackson. Do you know that one?
I mean, obviously I've heard it, but like I don't know it well enough to like bring to mind the key change.
Right. Yeah. No, that's fine. I will quickly find it and I'll play it to you. Yeah. So here it is, and it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous one. It really is just like, oh, it's just again that's my impression of a key change every time. I don't know why. It's terrible. It doesn't make sense. Here we go. But I mean I really like it, but it's just really really on the nose. Like what's that John Bon Jovi song that does it? I think it's one of their they have like two. I always forget the name of their songs. They sound so similar to me. Oh, we're halfway there. Living on a Prayer. Living on a Prayer is the one that does it. Again,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
usually done in like the outro because it's just like, yeah, we're gonna really Respect by Aretha Franklin. That's kind of a less super cheesy one, but she does one. It's halfway through the song in like the instrumental. But again, it's like a big thing in like kind of schmaltzy 90s kind of boy band pop. It's a big thing there. But
Mm.
yeah, you can immediately hear the difference, right? And again, there are other things going on in the song, like dynamically. It's also like, oh, we're just going to add like tons of backing singers and stuff at that point, and
Mhm.
so dynamically there are a few other things going on. But I think it's usually quite easy to identify compared to Aldous Harding's, um, which is a much more subtle. But the song as a whole is much more subtle, which is part and parcel of it. So anyway, that's us now. How well do you think? I mean, how well do you think I explained it? To what degree do you think I've done a good job of explaining some music theory concepts here?
Um, I think the visuals were like actually really helpful. Like that was something I absolutely did not understand at all before. I think where I struggle is like I don't have the foundation musical knowledge, so like I don't I don't I think you're giving me good explanations, but I don't have the right structure
Hmm.
to like put them in. But I feel like there's specific things that you've explained to Dave. Like I think they're helpful analogies.
Good, good. Okay, I'll take that. So you're saying you can only assume I'm doing a good job, right?
I can only assume you're
You
doing a
know
good
what?
job. I cannot myself judge because I am here because I'm a music idiot.
Right. But hopefully, like, because a large part of like talking about music theory is it's kind of like talking about like because we both did English at uni, right? So it's a bit like talking about grammar and stuff. And I do think people can instinctively talk accurately about literature
Right.
without knowing like, oh, the rhyme scheme is this specifically, oh, the grammatical structure is this specifically. And I think there are things you were able to identify in this song to do with just like the structure of the song, and you even if you couldn't identify specifically the structure, the fact that the structure is difficult to identify is part of how the song works. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
like even if you don't like have the knowledge to analyze and the vocabulary to express, like you always have a sense of something's going on here. It
Yes.
makes me feel this way, or it sounds sort of like this.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, that
definitely.
makes sense.
Anyway, thanks for coming on, and thanks for telling me I did a good job. That's what I want to hear. It's
Thank you for
fine,
having
girl.
me. It's
Yeah,
been fun.
lacking expertise. Cool, excellent. So, thank you. Maybe I'll do more of these videos. Maybe I won't. We shall see. Thank you very much.